Ladies and gents, whilst the music keeps on playing, you're welcome to settle in. We will do a formal welcome in a while, but you're welcome to settle in. We will start in a few minutes. We just allow some more people to join us. Right, I think we can start and get our webinar going. Ladies and gents, good afternoon. My name is Arnold Smit. I will be the panel facilitator for this afternoon. It's great to have you with us, especially our esteemed panel members, whom I will introduce to you a little bit later. And for you who have come, and may I also say those who are still coming, welcome. It is great to have you with us. I think we could confidently say that there wasn't before a person in our nation who was so commemorated and celebrated as the late President Nelson Mandela. Regarding his birthday, which was about 105 years ago, if we take tomorrow as the official day for that, we can talk about his release from prison. We can talk about his inauguration as president of South Africa, and of course also commemorating his funeral. And his life has had such an immense influence on South Africa and on the world in which we live. And of course, what we are doing today is just a tiny, maybe bit about what is happening worldwide around his legacy in the next day or two that's ahead of us. You will also note that I have put in the chat, I've put the link to the Mandela Day website for you. If you want to know more about activities, about kinds of things that you can be involved in, you will all find it there. So the purpose of our afternoon is indeed to commemorate his legacy, to celebrate what he has left behind for us, and more so to inspire all of us to personal and collective action, and specifically what I would like to refer to as responsible leadership action, because that is our angle in the conversation today as we are together here. So what we're going to do is we will have a conversation with our panelists, which I will facilitate, and then followed by you as audience in terms of your engagement with the panelists, for which you can use the chat, but also by means of a brief question or contribution that you would like to make, as long as that is brief and to the point. So I've referred to the Mandela Day website, and I would like to highlight two statements on that website. There's a statement that comes from a quote by President Mandela himself, as he said, "When a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country, he can rest in peace. I believe I've made that effort, and that is therefore why I will sleep for eternity." And then there's a second statement, and the second statement, which is a statement by the Mandela Foundation themselves, is the Mandela Day campaign is a celebration of our collective power to create a global movement for good and make a positive impact on the world. And I would like to invite you, by means of an introduction of yourself, to write in the chat, what is it that Mandela Day means for you, and what initiatives are you going to be involved in, or are you already involved in, that links to that memory and legacy. So whilst we are starting the conversation, please do so. Please add to the chat what it means for you and the kind of initiatives that you are involved in. To get us going, I want to bring in Mias de Klerk, Professor Mias de Klerk, a dear colleague from Stellenbosch Business School. He's a professor in leadership and also the director of the Stellenbosch Business School Center for Responsible Leadership Studies. And Mias, I would like you to put the day into perspective for us and tell us more about the concept responsible leadership. What does that mean? How it connects you to the day that we are celebrating, and why is it important for us to have this conversation today? So Mias, if you can open up for us, we really appreciate that.
Thank you, Arnold. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is good to see so many of you here this afternoon with us, and I hope that there are several more that will be joining us. Many people have registered, and welcome also from my side to our esteemed panel members. Responsible leadership is about doing what is good and right, and do that always. Not only for oneself and one's own organization, your board and your shareholders, but also for all other stakeholders, such as employees, our communities, the bigger society, the socio-economic world, and the natural environment, to ensure long-term sustainability and prosperity of all. As we celebrate the life of the late President Nelson Mandela and the 67 years that he relentlessly spent and even sacrificed at big personal cost to create a fair and just society, his approach to leadership, inclusivity, and his efforts to remind us about the significance of responsible leadership in our personal, relational, and societal terms, we're reminded of that again. The Center for Responsible Leadership Studies thus felt that it would be apt to arrange this webinar to reflect critically on the meaning and challenges of responsible leadership in the business environment, specifically considering the current South African economic and political environment, and I don't have to tell you much about that. But the idea is not to criticize and complain. That's being done enough by many people. This webinar aims to consider the meaning and challenges of responsible leadership constructively, and in such a way as to empower business leaders to enact responsible leadership principles and practices in their respective spheres of influence, and to create an alternative and constructive future for South Africa. And for this reason, we are very proud and humbled to be joined by such an impressive panel of speakers to head the discussions tonight. Thank you, Arnold. Back to you.
Thank you, Mias, and ladies and gents. I remember you kindly about my invitation. Please use the chat and tell us what this day means for you as well. So please make your contributions. Now, before we start with our panel, I had a very particular moment this morning when I had a conversation with one of my professors at university, who told me about a very personal engagement that he had with Mr. Mandela one day in his car. He was still a youngish man, and the car was not very clean on the inside, and he had to pick Mr. Mandela up for a ride. And he was really apologizing for the state of his car on the inside, putting it on the account of his children. And Mr. Mandela said to him, "Young man, don't be concerned about the condition of your car. Be concerned about your character," which I think, in a sense, also sums it up, the kind of person he was. So I would like to start with a societal perspective and bring Mr. Coovadia into the conversation. Now, Mr. Coovadia is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa, the former director, managing director of the Banking Association of South Africa, and the chairperson of the National Business Initiative. And I can go on and add many of his other responsibilities. Gus, I would assume that you met the late President Nelson Mandela personally, and I wonder whether you would mind, before we continue further with the conversation, to share with us some of the memories that you have of him as a leader and his influence on you.
Thanks, Prof, and thank you for the invitation. and hi to my fellow panelists. So yes, I did have the pleasure and the honor of working with Madiba during that time, particularly after his release and the run-up to the elections. And given that we don't have too much time, let me just give you one anecdote that to me captures what Madiba was. So in the early 90s, I was quite involved with a number of people in what we call the civic movement. And I was General Secretary of the Civic Associations of Johannesburg, which included civic associations in Soweto, Alexandra, Lands, and other places. And we were quite instrumental in, at that time, even before the ANC was unbanned, working to try and restructure the Johannesburg municipality with the authorities at that time. And we had something called the Transitional Metropolitan Chamber, which was chaired by Frederick van Slabbert. And I was one of the representatives of the civic movement there. And Madiba was going overseas, and we thought we needed to brief him on the thinking around the restructuring of local government that certainly we were involved in and discussing at that time between the sort of progressive movement and the political parties, the old political parties in the Johannesburg municipality at that time. And remember, this was before cell phones. So we used to have these pages. And a couple of us, Jessie Duarte was Madiba's personal assistant at that time. She called me, be on standby. She then said, come and see him at 6 in the evening. And we were talking, we were briefing, and my pager went off. And I looked at my pager, it was my wife saying, where the hell are you? You haven't called me. On your way home, pick up the following green veggies. So I sort of smiled, and Madiba stopped, and he said, we're discussing serious things. What's so funny? And I said, sorry, Madiba, it's from my wife. And my wife happened to be working at the ANC office at that time, so he knew her. It's from my wife, and this is what she said. So he stopped the meeting. He said, you haven't told your wife why you're not home yet. I said, no, I haven't had a chance. We had to rush you. There's the phone. Pick up the phone and tell her where you are and why you are where you are, and that she doesn't have to worry about you. Now, that was, to me, the essence of the man. He put family above things. He put humanity above things. He was at first quite cut up that I was smiling during, and Madiba was was very much a disciplinarian in many ways. Didn't suffer fools gladly. And when I got home and I told my wife, she said, how could you tell Madiba that I said this? And what will I tell him tomorrow? And I said, no, you tell him tomorrow, he stopped the meeting, not me. But I think that to me, what that encapsulates is firstly, the humility of the man, that he is able to say, you haven't called your family. That's much more important than what we're talking about. Secondly, he showed that when we busy with something, you don't get distracted. That's why he said, what are you smiling about? What's so funny? And thirdly, just to say that certainly in my interactions with him, he listened. He wanted you to actually challenge him. He wanted intelligent people around him so that he could be confident that people are taking decisions that are based on fact and empirically based. And to me, that's the sort of person he was, and that's a sort of one anecdote that I thought I should just reflect. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for sharing that, because I think in that sense, you've made it very personal. But then at the same time, if I can take the angle that you took right in the beginning, if I can take that a bit further, specifically when we look at his legacy from a societal perspective, he seemed to have been the kind of person who was able to soar above the the differences, and become kind of the center of bringing different stakeholders, different parts of society together, making stakeholder collaboration and engagement actually possible. And whenever I think about Coovadia, that's the image that I am constantly working with. Somebody who is never afraid of being in the thick of things, getting into the stream, bringing different sectors of society together, being an initiator of stakeholder collaboration, even if it sometimes means that it's looking like you are trying to keep warring factions together, Kes. So I relate that very much to the Mandela legacy, but at the same time, I also would like to ask you, what is it that invites you into these kinds of situations from a leadership perspective, being willing to stand at the center where so many of these opposing interests come together?
Well, look, I guess to a certain extent, it's the experience of our anti-apartheid struggle. I mean, I was quite involved at that time in many ways. And we fought, we conducted that struggle by and large under very, very difficult circumstances in a very honorable and accountable way. We recognized that it's not people who were the problem, be it white people or anybody else. It was the system that was the problem. And certainly as a Congress movement, as apart from, let's say, Black Consciousness movement and others, which we worked with, but as a Congress movement, we were absolutely clear that there are different parts of society that have different views, that have different fears, that have different things that we need to actually look at. And to be successful against the apartheid government, we needed to bring those different interests and different thoughts together under the banner of fighting and destroying apartheid. And so you know, the Congress movement organized in communities that were demarcated by the apartheid government, so in so-called colored communities, in so-called Indian communities, in white communities, in Black African communities. And we organized in all of those communities. And we recognized what each of those communities' fears were. We recognized what their concerns were, and we organized them around those concerns. And very often they were different concerns. But we brought them together because we had the one goal. And we demonstrated to them, be you white or black, that the apartheid is as oppressive to you as a white person as it is to me because of what it did. And getting rid of that, this is a benefit to all of us as South Africans. And that's what we want to build. And why do I still keep on doing that? Is we've got unfinished business. This democracy, and we need to protect it, and we need to protect our constitution, absolutely. But the reality is that for a whole host of reasons, the majority of the people in this country have not benefited from the democracy yet. And I say yet because that's the unfinished business. And in trying to complete that unfinished business, we need to recognize, by and large, I think all South Africans, most South Africans are patriotic South Africans, be you in business, be you in civil society or elsewhere. And different sectors of society still have different fears in the current context and different concerns. And I think we need to bring those together under the banner now of ensuring that our democracy works for all of our people and what we need to do that. So that's what drives me, in my view. I believe we've got the greatest country in the world. I think we've got the greatest people in the world. And we need to make this country work. Too many people have died for us. So that's what sort of drives me. And if I could just finish, Prof, with, you know, there's a quote from Madiba that to me exemplifies the different facets of what you believe in. So he said a good leader can engage in debate frankly and thoroughly, knowing that at the end, he and the other side must be closer. And this is what you're talking about. And thus emerge stronger together. You don't have that idea when you are arrogant, superficial, and uninformed. So in that quote, what does he say? He says you need to engage. You need to come together to be strong. You need to be humble. You need to be grounded and ethical. And he talks about meritocracy. You need to be informed in your debates. And to me, that exemplified his leadership. Thanks.
Yeah, and I am going to take the opportunity as well to say that indeed we see that still alive where you lead and where you're at the center of these kinds of interactions and engagements. Sim, I want to turn to you and bring the business perspective in. But before that, also would like to introduce you as the CEO of the Standard Bank Group. You're a Wits alumnus. You're an alumnus from Notre Dame. You're an alumnus from Harvard University. But most important today, you are Professor Sim Tshabalala, the honorary professor of Stellenbosch Business School, and it's great to have you with us. Madiba had a very specific relationship, I think, with business and with business leaders in his way of engaging with them. So the question that I would like to open up with from a personal perspective is, what is it that you as a business leader, and specifically of a bank with a continental and even wider footprint, that you take from his leadership example that's important to you in the role that you fulfill?
Thank you so very much, Prof, for those kind words. And the title of Professor Tshabalala, honorary professor of Stellenbosch, I mean, that's just beautiful. I wish you could say that more often. So thank you very much for that. I think the first thing I would want to say was that President Mandela was a Renaissance man in the sense of being broad-minded, a citizen of the world, had varying interests, was a boxer, a sportsman, and definitely somebody who had a wide variety of interests. The second thing I would want to reflect upon is a point that Kaz made, which is that this was a man of great humility. I first met him when I was a board member at my old school, Sacred Heart College. And at the time, he was a grandparent. And there was a function at the school. And he was obviously meeting people, including the board members. This gent spoke to me as if he'd known me forever, and I was the only person in the room, which of course I wasn't, and he didn't know who I was, but he spoke to me like that. And that just reminded me of just what Kaz said, that here is a person of massive influence, but enormous humility, which made me think as a business person that even people at that level can be grounded. The thought of Marcus Aurelius with the slave walking behind him, whispering in his ear, "You're just a man, you mortal, you're just a man, you're just a man." And it strikes me that this is how Mandela was. I think the next thing is that he was a great lawyer. And that's important from a business perspective, because the rule of law is so very important to institutions. The ability to contract and hold people accountable in terms of your contract, whether it be that contract or the social contract, the broad contract of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. And lastly, again, to close where Kaz left off, that is to say, here was a man who had incredible empathy. How do you spend 3 decades in prison and come out with the level of love, empathy, respect for everybody that he had? And it's a great lesson for not just political leaders, but for business leaders as well, that this is a human endeavor. Everything we do is about humanity. Put humanity at the heart of everything we do, and have just this great sense of empathy. Prof, perhaps let me leave it there.
Well, and speaking about the social contract, which I would like to focus on in the conversation with you, is we can, of course, not speak about responsible leadership as we do on this panel this afternoon without referring to the sustainable development as the broader umbrella under which we would like to place that as well. Now you are very explicit on your LinkedIn profile in stating that throughout Standard Bank's long history, we have existed to help people and businesses to achieve their goals, and in doing so, to promote economic and human development in Africa. But I want to go further. Perhaps one of my, and if I can say this, one of my best experiences at Stellenbosch Business School in an engagement in an MBA class was just a fascinating conversation between you and myself I think about 2 years ago in the midst of COVID. And there you said something very specific in that MBA class, and I guess it is so much part of who you are and what you think that we can bring it back into this conversation this afternoon as well, and that you're very public about it. You said the purpose of business is to serve society. Why do you say so?
At the end of the day, business is an organ of society. And in the case of a bank, it exists to meet human needs. It just so happens that those human needs can only be intermediated through economic activity. And so somebody buys a fridge, not so much because they like a fridge, but because they want to preserve their food. And it's therefore important for their health. And health is an important part of the soft infrastructure that makes it possible to live. People borrow money from a bank to purchase a home because they require the shelter. And therefore they build a home and bring up their family in that home. They come to the bank to facilitate payments that they need to send their children to Stellenbosch, to university. And therefore they need to make a deposit and make a payment, and the bank facilitates that. Again, an important part of building the social infrastructure, the humanity of it. In our case, Prof, we're at the moment grappling with the balance between carbon emissions and climate change on the one hand, and the need for people in a place like Uganda to stop using biomass, burning charcoal, messing up the environment and messing up their own health, and then also build the human infrastructure necessary for them to live well, roads, bridges, etc., off the back of fossil fuels that are being generated in that part of the world. You can think of many other examples. And so the need for us to facilitate, just to use another example, the movement of people from rural areas to the cities. McKinsey's just completed a study where they've said 500 million people will move to the cities in the next couple of years. Those people will need bridges, roads, buildings that make sure that they are protected against environmental degradation. I can't think of anything more human and more social than doing that. And so that those examples that I'm using, the social purpose of a business is to meet human needs, and that of a bank is to facilitate their economic activity that helps them to preserve their health, to provide themselves with homes, to build the infrastructure that they need to live a decent life. I hope that covers it.
Well, I appreciate that very much because you're highlighting the need that's being represented in the transaction. It's not about the transaction in the first place, but it's about the human need that's connected to that.
Indeed.
So taking the point that you've just made about Uganda, and of course that's a similar point that we can make about South Africa, taking that just one step further, and you are currently one of 15 business leaders in the World Bank's private sector investment lab that is specifically tasked with scaling the transition finance in renewable energy and infrastructure. Now, this is a big conversation at the moment. I want to go back to what Cass said about Madiba's point that once we had an engagement, a conversation, a debate, we need to be able to be better off as a result of that and move forward together because of the better understanding that we've created. What can we learn from you in your leadership, or what insights can you share with us in terms of navigating these difficult conversations in the polarities that we are talking of in the world in which we currently live? I mean, these are conversations within your bank, and sometimes also you need to navigate them in terms of South Africa's polarities around environment versus the economic interests, and also, of course, specifically related to energy. It's a continental issue, it's a global issue, and now you are part of this global body in that regard. So what leadership lessons can you share with us in terms of guiding others through these conversations and coming to decisions that will eventually contribute to the broader sustainable development agenda that we are faced with?
I think I would start by making the case for optimism, why it is important for leaders such as you and I, and leaders in business and in society, to make a choice to be optimistic. Because, Prof, whether you are pessimistic or optimistic is a choice. So if you choose to be optimistic, you will participate in that lab that you make reference to. Why would a busy chief executive do that? Because this busy chief executive believes that it is in the best interest of society to facilitate the trillions of dollars necessary to build the infrastructure that the emerging world needs to adapt to climate change and also to contribute to socio-economic development. I would argue for making those investments because I'm optimistic about the future. Secondly, one is optimistic about the future because this is about humanity. So putting human beings at the center of all our activities. In this case, Africa and emerging markets need to work with the World Bank to facilitate the raising of the trillions of dollars necessary to build the roads, the bridges, the dikes that are necessary to protect us against rising sea levels, making sure that cities in KZN have appropriate infrastructure to protect themselves against floods, that people are building homes in the right places. So therefore you need proper municipal town planning to make sure that people are adequately protected against flooding that is going to be happening. And that's what those conversations are about. An important element of this optimism is to say, yes, things have gone wrong in South Africa, and Kaz and others have been very articulate about crime, corruption, the lack of investment in hard infrastructure, the lack of investment in soft infrastructure, the power situation. It's a terrible situation. It's actually borderline disgraceful. But the optimism says, but you know, we've got 9,000 megawatts hours that are under construction, about 3,000 of which will be coming online over the next 2 years. What do we need to do to facilitate the acceleration of that so that the South African economy can continue to grow and create jobs, provide people with protection and so forth? The other lesson, of course, is one which is spoken about in an incredibly important article, which I always refer people to. It's written by Dresner. It's in the July issue of the Foreign Affairs magazine, and it's called The Perils of Pessimism: Why Pessimistic Nations Are Dangerous Nations. And it makes the case that I'm making here, that you will invest in countries, you will invest in infrastructure, you will build bridges, you will build dams, if and only if you're optimistic about the future and you've got humanity at the center of it. And as leaders, we need to speak up about such things, to say, you know, it's not that we are naive when we are optimistic. It's that we have the courage to say, please let us make these investments so that there is human development because it's the right thing to do. The contrawise is that if you're pessimistic, you will be risk averse. You will not make investments. You will not hire people. You will not train people. You will not invest in health. You will not invest in the education system. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, and thank you for giving us that cue, because I do think that sets us up for the conversation with Shirley, which I think is very much about the personal value system, Shirley, of the leader, and very much of a higher sense of purpose in terms of steering your own direction through life and through decision making. So before I want to open up the conversation with you, just for our audience, Professor Shirley Zinn is the chair of the V&A board, and she's also serving in a variety of non-executive director positions, an alumnus of UWC, of UNISA and Harvard, and for the sake of today, a member of the advisory committee of the Stellenbosch Business School Center for Responsible Leadership Studies, and a very appreciated guest lecturer in many of our classes. So Shirley, when I think about quotes coming from President Mandela, the following one came to mind in my conversation with you. I learned, he said, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave, and he said man, and I would, for the sake of inclusion, also say this afternoon woman, is not he or she who does not feel afraid, but he or she who conquers that fear. So we know and appreciate you for your moral strength and wisdom in many of the situations where you act as a leader and a board member. And maybe how does your story connect from that perspective with the Mandela legacy? Can you tell us more?
Thank you very much, Professor, and good evening to our audience. And to it's such an honor to be on the panel with Kaz and with Sim. We've been playing in different spaces and the same spaces over the many years. And so a true honor to do Mandela's 67 minutes together with all of you this evening. And I think it's a great place to start, Prof. Arnold, because I was going to pick up from where some left off on the optimism piece before I just got into my, a little bit of my personal journey, because I do think that this courage that you talk about and this not being an absence of fear, but the triumph of it is deeply personal as well. And for me, it has been an incredibly personal journey. And so we have to look at our personal journeys, our individual efforts and our collective efforts in order to shift to really truly building a better place for all. And as Sam was talking about optimism, I was one is so tempted to do further quotes, and I have to say this one before I start to speak about my understanding of responsible leadership and how that's played out in my various roles as an educator first, as a executive in a whole variety of organizations, and as a non-executive now in academia, in listed, in privates, and in NPOs. So I think that this point that Madiba made around I'm fundamentally an optimist, whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed forward and one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. And I think for me, that is an incredibly powerful insight that he has given us to reflect on. And I think, his definition of bold, courageous, servant leadership that is responsible is something that calls upon us to stand on our principles, to be values-led, to be purpose-driven. And I think all of us speakers here have touched on that in various ways today, because our values inform how we think and how we behave. And for me, this has been a set of key drivers and anchors across my life and career. It's also fortified me and strengthened me in times when I was sorely tested as a non-executive director, in particular in more recent days, and maintaining personal integrity in the face of huge challenge and adversity. When your personal integrity is put on the line, I think is very, very important to go back to these fundamental messages that have encouraged me and has enabled me to always think about the common good wherever I am. And even though today we celebrate 67 days, I think we need to be doing this every day, because I understand that today is the theme for today is in terms of International Nelson Mandela Day is it's in your hands, it's in our hands, it's in our individual hands, it's in our collective hands to address the scourge of poverty and suffering and deprivation, and impacting on individual lives through our own transformational leadership. And we can do this from wherever we are. We can do it, and we need to do it because we need to create a better world for all, especially the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. And it's great that we can talk about our vulnerabilities as we were educated by Madiba. I love the story that Cash shared and that Sim shared now about their own interaction. And I think for me, the interaction right at the end of Madiba's life was the privilege of having to go when he was lying in state and just to stand in the presence and reflect on an incredible life gave me such a sense of personal purpose. I grew up in the Cape Flats, and the challenges faced by these communities, as Kaz was pointing out in some of our civic organizations, are huge. And for me, I think I was at high school when I started to connect the dots between my own socioeconomic challenges, the apartheid regime of the day, and the importance and necessity of education. And so for me, education was going to be my liberation. And I do think that today we need to reflect on what does responsible leadership in action truly mean. And that today we, in fact, need some sort of leadership miracle in the world and in South Africa, so that we can empower people to lead from where they are, and we can call out deficient and dysfunctional leaders that do not follow the values, do not follow rules, regulations, and legislation, and that we can truly focus on building a cadre of leadership that will unlock South Africa's prosperity, unleash its talent, and focus on what is possible in South Africa, unlocking that value for South Africa and that potential. So I could speak on and on about this, but I do think we have a huge responsibility as leaders here today. I think all of us have to reflect on that question here this evening, and I hope that today I can encourage you that today be a call to action. Thank you.
Yeah. So can I ask you maybe to be on a reflect on a personal level? What is it that nurture your sense of steadfastness, of purpose, of as your own the title of your book speaks about, swimming upstream? What is it that you do in order to nurture that sense of purpose within yourself?
I think thank you very much, Prof. Arnold, for that question. I think that coming from the very difficult circumstances that one comes from, and then trying to be a student activist at the University of Western Cape, however small that little ignition was beginning to happen within me, I read very widely on how can we fix some of the challenges that we are facing. And I think the combination of my difficult personal circumstances at the time and my understanding about what a privilege it was to have access to education, and as the great Madiba says, education is the most powerful weapon with which you can use to change the world. I've dedicated myself to a journey of educating myself so that I could make the difference in the world. And I think it had opened doors for me that I would never have imagined in terms of career, but also in terms of life, and being able to reach out to younger people, to plant seeds of hope and inspire them, and at the same time to understand my own journey of swimming upstream and cutting across barriers and obstacles, which from race and gender and all sorts of other perspectives made life incredibly challenging. And even many of you would have read my book and understood my career journey, but on the personal front, also in the middle of working on this, we've been through trauma and tragedy in our lives. We've been through COVID. We've lost loved ones, and right in the middle of all of my career development and my education, to lose my an only child in this situation, and that vulnerability, that devastation, and saying to people, that we talk about wellness, we talk about people putting people first in our organizations. I think those lessons have enabled me to work in organizations and drive some of the philosophy and culture, a culture of inclusion, a culture of belonging, a culture of truly caring for people. And I'm so pleased to hear that Sim used the word love as well, because I think that's what we need more of, because those are the values that drive our passions to create a better world. And so, to answer your question, Prof. Arnold, that is what drives my sense of purpose, that I can get up every day and make a difference in this country, especially inspiring hope in our young people and building leaders who are just waiting to blossom and give direction and sustain our talent pools for our country and for our continent. So yeah, it's hard to put it into curative language here, but that's the answer I can offer you. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. It is wonderful to be in a conversation where we realize that one person's life story can connect us and invite so many perspectives on what life is about, whether it's on the societal level, whether it's in business, whether it's so very personal as you have just highlighted. Mias, I think you have had your eyes on the chat line, and maybe you've picked up something there that you would like to bring into the conversation, or just even something that touched you that you would like to bring into the fold here.
Thanks, Arnold. Yes. What I see in the chat line is, from the comments we've had, is people confirming what's being said, that we must all do what we can do. We must care for each other. Love thy neighbor was said. Sometimes we don't have any solutions and you just lend the ear because there are no solutions. So it aligns very close to what Gus and Sim and Shirley have said. And what Gus and Shirley have said, you guys talked about the lost opportunities and people have missed out, but then we also talked about the optimism and the courage for building something more. And I was wondering, and I don't know, you can decide, but maybe to start with Gus, I do see this very strong, at least for the people that are here today and those that have commented, commitment to do something and not just to blame and complain. But it is difficult, and it is difficult because sometimes, quite often, those in power don't necessarily help us to do this. So maybe a few practical ideas beyond the courage and the optimism. What can we do as mere citizens to take this forward and build this nation, that these people that have missed out, that we can change that around?
Please, Gus, I think Mias's comment is addressed to you to start off with, and the other panel members are welcome
thanks,
to
Prof, and thanks, Mias. So, we're in a sort of conjuncture in our country where you can feel immobilized at times because there's just so much happening. There are numerous crises. And I think that to recognize the difficulties we have and to recognize the conjuncture we are at is, in my view, part of being optimistic, because you can't deal with issues optimistically, deal with issues with a view to actually making a national interest and taking our country and its people forward, if you don't recognize the situation we are in. So the situation does sometimes tend to immobilize you. But I think that what we need to do and what is being done, and coincidentally, I spent just over an hour earlier today at Harambee, which is doing, I mean, I've worked with Harambee for a while. I knew what they were doing, but they just took me through what they're doing, what their next steps are. They took me on a tour of the offices. I met some of the students there. I met some of the people who have actually, through Harambee, found jobs and are working. And you just realize, in a very good way, that we have young people who will make this country work, who we can put our faith in, who we can put our confidence in. And who are doing their best under very difficult circumstances. And the sort of work Harambee is doing is phenomenal in the area of skilling and creating jobs and enabling young people from very, very difficult backgrounds and situations to get into the sort of jobs track, if you like. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to, in our little areas of work, in our little areas of influence, we all need to put our shoulders to the wheel and make any little difference we can. While people like myself might be talking to government about national issues and about how we can get our economy sorted and so on, there are hundreds of people and plenty organizations that on the ground are doing great work and making a difference in ordinary people's lives. And I think that's what it is. And we've all got to carry on doing that. I think that we've all got to be focused. In the old days, the focus was to get rid of apartheid. In my view, today, the focus has got to be to make democracy work for all of our people. And we can do that in big national initiatives that we're involved in, but we can do that also in important, small ways that make a real difference in ordinary people's lives. And I think that's where the differences and changes are going to happen. Because that's where, no matter what part of society you come from, you actually find commonalities. You actually find that you can work together to make a difference in just one person's life. And I think, to me, and I see that in South Africans on the ground. You leave people to do things and to sort themselves out, they'll sort themselves out, and they'll help their neighbor in sorting themselves out. And so I think it's those sorts of stuff that give me confidence, that make me optimistic, and that every day convince me that we have depth of, you can call it Ubuntu. I mean, sometimes I don't like to use the term because we do a lot of things that fly against that. But at the, on the ground, at the end of the day, ordinary people are good people, and they are making a big difference in their lives and others' lives. And that's what's going to take us through. Thanks.
And I think thank you, Kaz. I think we are talking about agency here, and to an extent, Mias, I think the two questions that have been also responded to now is transforming the prevailing finite mindset, and also the one thing that we should be stopped doing as leaders to enable more positive social outcomes. And I think this is what Kaz is talking about. From an agency perspective, Shirley, would you like to respond to the same?
Yes, if I may, Shirley, do you mind if I go? So, Prof, one of the things that struck me as Kaz and also when Shirley spoke, which is why I want to speak before Shirley speaks, was reference to love and the issue of agency. And my view is that we should not be embarrassed to use notions like those, because people like Mandela actually use them too. And the main reason I make that point is because we little speak about the fact that Mr. Mandela was a man of faith. He was a Methodist. And that South Africans are deeply, deeply religious people, whether they be Hindus, Catholics, Protestants, Anglicans, Methodists, Jews, Muslims. They are people of faith. The second point is that without being chauvinist, one can use principles of faith to give effect to agency. You remember the famous story of the founder of Panasonic, Konosuke Matsushita, who went to visit the shrine. And after coming from the shrine, he said, oh my goodness, how similar religion is to a business. And what's the purpose of business? To take you back to your earlier question of me, it's about providing people with goods, social goods. Why do you want to do that? Because it's about humanity and because you love humanity. And hence the notion of love and being attracted to this idea of saying, you're doing it because it's the right thing to do and because you love people and you want to make a difference. And Kaz is right. You know, we must all play in our lanes. Prof, it is okay, I think, for professors to focus on getting the best students to go through university, for engineers to be the best engineer of sewage reticulation that they can be, of bankers to be honest bankers that do the right business the right way all the time, and for us to be the best at what we do. Because it's not going to be solved by the big gestures and by the big people. It's going to be solved by the truck drivers who say, I'm not going to participate in this activity. It's by the civil servant who says, I'm running this municipality, we're going to stick to our budget and we're not going to make improper procurement. It's going to be the bank teller who refuses to be taken in by the criminal syndicate. And then it's going to be Kaz leading us from the front. All of us playing in our lane, doing the best that we can in the great and beautiful tradition of the South African Constitution. Thanks.
Really, thank you for that. I think you also wanted to contribute to that, and I also have my eye on time. We are moving in closely towards our 67 minutes, and maybe there might be somebody in the audience that would like to ask a question, and I would like to invite you if you want to do so. But Shirley, I think you indicated that you would also like to contribute to this point.
Thank you very much, Prof. Arnold. I deeply appreciate that we are able to have this conversation today and that we're able to raise concepts that we don't normally talk about in, when we talk about boardrooms, or what goes on in boardrooms, what the topics and the agendas of boardrooms are and executive committees are, and that we definitely have expanded our lens in terms of not only talking about profitability anymore, but really playing front and center around making a difference to society, making a difference to our environment and ensuring that we remain sustainable, making a difference to our youth. And we don't have to do the massively grand stuff. I mean, as people have been saying, we can do very small things right where we are, and we can create a movement for good just by doing it right where we are. And I think, Mandela was I mean, as was said by the Secretary General of the United Nations a few days ago, is a colossus of courage and conviction, a leader of immense achievement and extraordinary humility, and a giant in our times whose legacy can best be honored through action. And I think I want to go back to that point again, because I think we need to say we understand what we need to do. And we have the ability to do the work that needs to shift the needle to ensure that we are We are the courage that people are looking for. We are raising the awareness. We are doing the fight against injustice, and we are helping people in need in terms of advancing reconciliation, and that we can lead with kindness, generosity, and service to humanity. And that this is all in the realm of the possible, going back to, the impossible is indeed possible. Thank you.
I think what this conversation brought for us, specifically on that note, Shirley, that you have also highlighted now, is the centrality of humanity, of solidarity, of love, of being willing to be vulnerable in the midst of others, and so on. So the real energy, it seems, when we talk about this, and what the legacy of Madiba ignites in us, is the sense of humanity. I think this is what we remember him for. I think this is what we, in thinking about leadership, specifically appreciate from what he represented. And therein then, and because of the fact that also when we talk about this, we talk about human community and how we stand together and work together with others to create that which we all long for. And if our conversation this afternoon contributed towards that, and also encouraged us all for taking a sense of agency, that we can make a difference and be that difference, I think we have succeeded in what we tried to discuss and position in this conversation. I think time has caught up with us. We've done the 67 minutes, if I look at the clock, but that's not what I want to highlight as important. I really appreciate Kaz, Shirley, Sim, for the time that you were willing to make, but also for the fact that you did not take the conversation to the objective, to the impersonal, but that you really brought it close to home and make it so personal as you've done. And with that, gave us once again a sense into this wonderful legacy that we can treasure, but at the same time also highlights for us how this can transform us all into agents of change if we follow that example. So I want to thank all three of you once again. I want to thank colleague Mias de Klerk for planning this together. I want to thank everybody who attended this afternoon. And I specifically also want to thank our Stellenbosch Business School Marketing Department, our IT people, and also Mariska, our GTA. These are all acronyms, Cass and Shirley and Sim, that our Stellenbosch colleagues will understand, but it's just to highlight the people behind the scenes. We really appreciate you all. So thinking about the legacy that we treasure, love to you all. Have a wonderful evening, and may the day tomorrow be a significant and meaningful one for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Gus. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Shirley. Arnold.
Thanks, Prof.
Thank you
Great
very
job.
much. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.